He told me it was work that kept him away, but the only medicine he sought was cheap perfume. Hello, my dears. I'm Amanda Ferreira Johnson. I'm 83 years old today, and I'm going to share a story I've kept in my heart for over 60 years. It's a story of pain and betrayal, but also of how a woman can rebuild herself even when she loses everything she thought she had. Before I begin, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It helps me continue sharing my experiences with all of you. It was 1960. I had just turned 18. I was born and raised in Riverdale, a small town where everyone knew everyone else. My mother always said I was too pretty for that place, that someday a young man would come and take me to a better life. And that's what happened when Herbert arrived in town. Herbert Johnson was 25, with dark hair neatly combed with brilliantine white teeth and a smile that lit up any room. He came from Chicago to work as an accountant at the only textile factory in the region. Back then, a man with a steady job from the big city was considered quite a catch. Single mothers would line up outside church on Sundays just to introduce their daughters to him. I don't know why, among so many pretty girls, he chose me. Perhaps because I was the most innocent. My mother had died 2 years earlier from pneumonia, and my father drank to forget his pain. I took care of the house and my 2 younger brothers, with no time for romance or dreams. I remember as if it were yesterday the first time he spoke to me. I was buying bread at Mr. Anthony's bakery when I smelled a different cologne, a big city scent. When I turned around, there he was. "Miss, you dropped this," he said, handing me an embroidered handkerchief I hadn't even noticed I'd dropped. Our fingers touched, and I felt a shiver I had never experienced before. After that day, Herbert appeared everywhere I went, at the market, at church, even when I went to fetch water from the well. Within 2 weeks, he had asked my father's permission to court me. Dad, of course, immediately agreed. A son-in-law with a steady job meant one less mouth to feed. The courtship lasted only 3 months. In June 1960, we were married in the town's main church. My dress was sewn by Mrs. Sullivan, the best seamstress in town, with fabric that Herbert brought specially from Chicago. It was white with small pearls on the bodice. I had never worn anything so beautiful in my life. Our honeymoon was at a friend's beach house in Lake Michigan. It was 5 days of dreamlike bliss. Herbert was gentle, caring, and treated me like a princess. When we returned, we moved into a simple but cozy house that the factory rented for its employees. I was radiant with my new life. I finally had a home of my own, without the sadness of my father's house. The first few months were perfect. I would wake up early, prepare coffee for Herbert, tidy up the house while humming and waiting for him to return from work. At night, we would talk about our dreams, about the children we would have, about the house we would one day build. It was only in the 4th month of marriage that I noticed something strange. At the beginning of every month when Herbert received his paycheck, he would come home with a terrible headache. "It's a migraine," he would say. "I've suffered from them since childhood." "Amanda, my dear," he would say weakly, "I need to go see a doctor in Chicago. He's the only one who understands my condition. I'll be back tomorrow." The first time, I was extremely worried. I prepared lemon balm tea, put cold compresses on his forehead, asked if he wanted me to accompany him, but Herbert insisted it was better for me to stay. "The treatment takes time. You'd be alone in Chicago. It's dangerous." And so, at the beginning of every month, the same story repeated itself. Herbert would pack a small suitcase with a change of clothes and leave on the 7 a.m. bus to Chicago. He would return the next day, always with gifts for me, a colorful scarf, a fragrant soap, chocolates. I treasured each of these gifts. In December of that same year, I discovered I was pregnant. Herbert's happiness seemed sincere. He hugged me, spun me around the room, kissed my still flat belly. "It's going to be a strong boy like his father," he would say proudly. Our first son, August, was born in July 1961. He was the spitting image of his father, with the same dark, penetrating eyes. Herbert seemed like the happiest man in the world. For 3 months, there were no headaches, no trips to Chicago. He came straight home from work, helped me with the baby, and was the husband every woman dreamed of having. But in October, the old routine returned. "Amanda, the pain is back. I need to see the doctor." This time, with a small baby in my arms, I didn't question it. I simply nodded while rocking August, who was crying with colic. The years passed, and our family grew. After August came Mary Claire in 1963, and finally John Peter in 1965. 3 small children, a house to take care of, and a husband who religiously disappeared on the first day of each month. People in town commented at first in whispers that I pretended not to hear. Over time, the voices grew louder. Poor Amanda, so dedicated, and her husband always traveling. Doctor? What doctor? Every month the same story. A man who disappears like that is up to no good, that's for sure. I ignored the comments, closed my ears to the gossip. After all, Herbert was a good father when he was home. He didn't drink like my father, didn't beat me like Mrs. Lord's husband from the bakery. He brought home his salary, minus the small part that, according to him, he spent on doctors. It was only in 1968, after 8 years of marriage, that the truth began to surface. August was now 7, Mary Claire was 5, and John Peter was 3. It was an ordinary day. I was at the market buying vegetables for dinner when I felt a hand touch my shoulder. It was Josephine, an elderly lady who sold pumpkin preserves in the central square. Everyone knew her, but few spoke to her. They said she was the mother of a fallen woman, as they called them back then. It was such a great shame that Josephine herself lived like a shadow, always with her head down, always on the margins. "Mrs. Johnson," she said with a trembling voice, "I need to speak with you privately." I confess I was apprehensive. What could a woman like Josephine want with me? But there was an urgency in her eyes, a sadness so deep that I couldn't refuse. We went to a bench in the square, away from curious eyes. Josephine wrung her hands in her worn apron, as if seeking courage in the folds of the fabric. "Mrs. Johnson, forgive my intrusion, but I can no longer keep this to myself. You're a good woman. You take care of those children with so much love. You don't deserve to be deceived." My heart began to beat faster. Some part of me already knew what was coming, but another part, the one that still loved Herbert as on the first day, refused to accept it. "What are you talking about, Mrs. Josephine?" "About your husband, Mrs. Johnson, about Herbert. He doesn't go to any doctor when he travels. He goes to the Moonlight Star, a place for women on the outskirts of Chicago." The ground seemed to disappear beneath my feet. I gripped the edge of the bench to keep from falling. "How do you know this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Josephine lowered her eyes, the wrinkles on her face seeming deeper under the morning sun. "My daughter Theodora works there, Mrs. Johnson. I'm not proud of it, but it's the truth. She told me that your husband goes there every month, always on the same day, the day he receives his paycheck. Part of me wanted to scream at that woman, accuse her of being a liar, of wanting to destroy my marriage. But another part, the one that had been noticing the small signs over the years, the different cologne when he returned, the increasingly elaborate excuses, the gifts to appease guilt, knew she was telling the truth. "Does he only see your daughter?" I asked, the words coming out like stones from my throat. Josephine shook her head, her eyes now teary. "No, Mrs. Johnson. Theodora is just one of them. He keeps several girls there, 13 to be exact. He boasts about it. Says he's the only man in the region who can support so many women. Every month he throws a kind of party, gathers all of them. It's as if he had several wives, Mrs. Johnson." 13. The number echoed in my mind like a funeral bell. 13 women besides me. 14 lives that Herbert manipulated like pieces in a perverse game. I returned home that day like a ghost, dragging my feet, carrying an invisible weight on my shoulders. The children noticed something was wrong, but attributed it to fatigue. I prepared dinner mechanically, bathed the little ones, told bedtime stories, all on autopilot, while inside me a whirlwind of emotions threatened to tear me apart. That night, lying alone in bed, Herbert was at one of his medical consultations. I made a decision. I would no longer be a passive victim. I would no longer accept lies. The next morning, I would discover the truth with my own eyes. And that, my dears, was how the turning point in my story began. The next day, I would do something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. After that sleepless night, I woke before the sun rose. My decision was made. If Herbert could lie for 8 years, I could pretend for 1 day. I prepared breakfast as I always did, dressed the children for school, smiled when necessary. Inside, my heart was bleeding, but I didn't show it. I took August and Mary Claire to school. John Peter, still young, I left in the care of Constance, my neighbor. I have to go to the city to buy fabric for the children's uniforms, I lied. The first lie of my life, how ironic. But God will forgive me, for it was for a just cause. I took the same bus that Herbert always took at 11 a.m. 3 hours of travel to Chicago, sitting in the last row, watching the landscape change from green fields to gray buildings. Each mile traveled was a knot forming in my stomach. What if Josephine was wrong? What if it was all a misunderstanding? At the Chicago bus station, I was lost. A small-town girl who had never left Riverdale alone, now in the biggest city in the country, looking for a place called Moonlight Star, a name I wouldn't dare pronounce out loud. I gathered all my courage and approached an elderly taxi driver who seemed more trustworthy. "Sir, do you know a place called Moonlight Star? I need to find my husband who's there." I spoke with a trembling voice. The man looked me up and down, assessing my simple dress, my worn shoes, my golden wedding band. "Are you sure, ma'am? It's not a place for a lady like you," he replied, his voice laden with pity. That pity hurt me more than anything else. It was real then. It wasn't Josephine's invention. "I'm sure," I replied, raising my chin. "My husband is there, and I need to see him." The taxi driver sighed, scratched his graying beard. "I'll take you, but I'll wait outside. When you're done with what you need to do, I'll be there. A woman alone in that place isn't safe." We got into the yellow cab, the engine roaring like my restless stomach. We crossed Chicago, left the city, took a dirt road. Almost an hour of travel until we reached a remote location, hidden among trees. It was an old mansion, painted faded red, with an illuminated sign at the entrance. "Moonlight Star, live music." "We're here," said the taxi driver. "Are you sure you want to go in?" I nodded, unable to speak. I paid the fare with money I had been saving for months to buy a new radio. "I'll wait for you here," he assured me. I got out of the taxi, my legs wobbly. It was mid-afternoon, the sun still high, but the mansion's curtains were closed, as if creatures of the night lived inside. I took 3 deep breaths, fixed my hair, touched my wedding ring for strength, and walked to the entrance. A burly man guarded the door. He looked at me with suspicion. "We're closed to women. We only open at night," he growled. "My husband is in there," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Herbert Johnson. I'm Amanda, his wife." The man's eyes widened, then he gave a harsh laugh. "Herb's wife? That's a good one." Herb. He didn't even use his real name in that place. "May I come in?" I insisted. "Look, ma'am, I don't want trouble. Herb is an important client." "I won't make a scene," I promised, even without knowing if I could keep my word. "I just want to see him." Maybe it was the dignity in my posture, or maybe the curiosity to see the outcome of this story. But the man stepped aside. "Your responsibility," he muttered as I passed. The interior of the Moonlight Star was another world. Crystal chandeliers, red velvet curtains, huge mirrors on the walls. A long bar occupied one side of the hall, and small round tables filled the rest. On an improvised stage, a woman was rehearsing a song at the piano. Her sequined dress sparkled even in the dim light. There were few people at that hour, some girls in tight dresses chatting at the bar, two men discussing figures at a distant table. And there he was, Herbert, my husband, sitting at a large table in the back, surrounded by 4 young women laughing at something he was telling. 8 years of marriage, 3 children, thousands of lies. All culminating in that moment, in that scene that I never imagined witnessing. The man I loved, the father of my children, distributing money and gifts to women he barely knew, while I saved every penny to maintain our home. I stood frozen at the entrance, my legs immobile. One of the girls at the bar noticed me, nudged her colleague. Soon, several pairs of eyes were turned to me. The music stopped. The sound of glasses and conversations ceased. Only the sound of Herbert's laughter echoed, oblivious to the silence that had settled. It was one of the women at his table who alerted him, touched his arm, pointed in my direction. Herbert turned his face slowly, like in a nightmare in slow motion. Our gazes met across the hall. I'll never forget the expression on his face. First, confusion, then recognition. Finally, pure terror. He turned pale, his mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Amanda," he managed to say, his voice failing. "What? How did you—" I advanced through the hall, each step firmer than the last. The women at the table moved away, making room. It seemed as if everyone at the Moonlight Star was holding their breath. "Hello, Herbert," I said, with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "I came to see how your medical consultation was going." "Amanda, it's not what you're thinking." "No? Then explain to me, dear. Explain why for 8 years, every month, you leave home pretending to be sick to come to this place. Explain why you spend the money that should feed our children on this." "I can explain," he stammered, standing up. "Let's talk outside, Amanda. This is no place for you." "It's no place for me." "And is it a place for you, father of 3 children, for the man who swore fidelity before God?" One of the women at the table, a young blonde in a red dress, laughed openly. "Father of 3 children, Herb? You never mentioned children." "Shut up, Marlene," Herbert growled. Another woman, older with black hair and shrewd eyes, approached. "So you're his wife? Fascinating. He told us he was a widower." "A widower," I repeated, my indignation growing. "A widower with a wedding ring on his finger." "He says he wears the ring in memory of his deceased," explained a third with bright red lipstick. "So romantic, isn't it?" Herbert seemed to shrink with each revelation. His face alternated between white and red. His forehead glistened with sweat. "Amanda, let's go home," he tried, extending his hand to touch me. I took a step back. "Don't touch me. Never touch me again." That's when a young girl, perhaps 20 years old, approached timidly. Her eyes were large and sad. She reminded me of a frightened doe. "Are you Amanda?" she asked softly. I nodded, not understanding. "I'm Theodora, Josephine's daughter." So that was Josephine's daughter, the girl who had unwittingly revealed the truth about my marriage. "Your mother told me," I said. "That's why I came." "She shouldn't have meddled," shouted Herbert, his face now completely red. "Be quiet, Herbert," I ordered, and to my surprise he obeyed. "Let Theodora speak." The young woman nervously wrung her hands. "He's been coming here every month since before I started working. He's known as Herb, the man with 13 lovers." 13? I repeated, feeling the floor undulate beneath my feet. "1 for each lucky day," explained Theodora. "He says he was born on the 13th, that his lucky number is 13, that having 13 women brings fortune, a ridiculous superstition, a childish whim. That was why my marriage was destroyed, for a number." "Where are the others?" I asked, looking around the nearly empty hall. "They'll arrive tonight," said the black-haired woman. "It's the 1st of the month, the day of Herb's monthly party." "Party?" I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. "Every 1st of the month," she explained. "Herb gathers all his protégés, brings gifts, buys drinks, tells stories from the city." It's the busiest day at the Star. Herbert shrank like a child caught red-handed. Amanda, it's not exactly like that. A hysterical laugh erupted from my throat. No? Then how is it, Herbert? Explain to all of us how it is. I take care of you, of all of you, he stammered. I bring money, gifts. What more do you want? Honesty, I replied. Respect, true love, things that no money can buy. I looked around at the women who now formed a circle around us. Some were smiling, amused by the spectacle. Others seemed bored, as if they had seen similar scenes many times. Theodora, Josephine's daughter, had tears in her eyes. None of you are to blame, I said to them. He lied to you as much as he lied to me. We're all in the same boat. Don't compare me to these, Herbert began, but fell silent when I raised my hand. Be careful what you're about to say, Herbert. These are your choices, your lovers. You sought them out, paid for them, lied for them. Don't dare despise them now. I turned to leave. My mission was accomplished. I had confirmed the truth with my own eyes. There was nothing more to do in that place. Amanda, wait, Herbert called, grabbing my arm with excessive force. You can't leave me. What will they say in town? What will become of my children? Let go of me, I ordered, my voice icy. Your children will be better off without a father like you. You're not going anywhere, he growled, tightening his grip on my arm. You're my wife. You owe me obedience. That's when something unexpected happened. Theodora, Josephine's daughter, advanced and pushed Herbert with surprising strength. Let her go, she shouted. Haven't you done enough? Herbert staggered in surprise but quickly recovered. His face contorted into a mask of fury I had never seen before. He raised his hand, ready to strike Theodora. He didn't complete the movement. The guard from the door, attracted by the commotion, grabbed Herbert from behind. No violence against the girls, Herb, he said in a calm but firm voice. You know the rules. Herbert struggled, but it was useless. The man held him like someone holding a tantrum-throwing child. Let me go! She's my wife! I have the right! Right? I repeated, finding strengths I didn't know I possessed. You lost any right over me the moment you decided to live this double life. We're through, Herbert. I took off my wedding ring, the small circle of gold that for 8 years had represented my marriage, and placed it on the table. The clink of the metal on the wooden surface sounded like a funeral bell. When you come back home, your things will be on the porch, I declared. Don't knock on the door. Don't try to enter. That's no longer your home. You can't do this, he yelled, still held by the guard's strong arms. I'm the one who supports the house. Without me, you'll all starve. I raised my chin, feeling a dignity I had never experienced. I'd rather starve with honor than live on lies. Goodbye, Herbert. I turned my back and walked to the exit, head held high, despite my trembling legs. Behind me, I heard Herbert shouting threats, promising to leave me in misery, swearing he would take the children from me. At the door, I stopped and turned one last time. One thing, Herbert, I said, my voice clear in the silent hall. You have 13 lovers, but you'll discover that you don't have a single wife, not one true love. And in the end, that's what matters. I went out into the afternoon air, the sun already beginning to set. The taxi driver was still there, as promised, leaning against the yellow hood, smoking a cigarette. All right, ma'am? He asked, throwing the cigarette to the ground and stepping on it. Not honestly, but I will be. I got into the taxi, leaving behind the moonlight star and the man I thought I knew. As the car moved away down the dirt road, I felt a strange mixture of pain and relief. The pain of a broken marriage, of broken promises, of shattered dreams. The relief of finally knowing the truth, of being able to start over, of regaining my dignity. The road back to Riverdale would be long, the life that awaited me uncertain. 3 children to raise alone in an era when separated women were viewed with contempt. But one thing I knew, I would never be deceived again. I would never accept less than I deserved. And it was with that thought that I returned home that night in 1968, ready for the most difficult but also the most truthful chapter of my life. When I got home that night, the children were already asleep. I thanked Constance for taking care of them. I made up a story about the trip to buy fabric. She noticed something in my eyes but didn't ask. Women of that time knew when not to ask questions. I waited for her to leave, and then I collapsed. I cried silently in the kitchen so the children wouldn't hear. I cried for the love I thought I had, for the family I imagined perfect, for the years of illusion. 8 years believing a lie, 8 years sleeping next to a stranger. After emptying all the pain my chest could hold, I dried my tears and started working. I gathered Herbert's clothes, his shoes, his personal belongings. I put everything in 2 large leather suitcases, the same ones we used on our honeymoon in Lake Michigan, in a life that now seemed to belong to someone else. I left the suitcases on the porch, along with a simple note: "Don't come back. You are no longer welcome here." I changed the lock on the front door with the help of a rusty screwdriver I found in the yard cabinet. I had never done anything like that before. Changing locks was men's work, but that night I discovered I could do much more than I imagined. I slept with a broomstick beside the bed, fearing that Herbert would return drunk and violent. But he didn't appear that night, nor the next. It was 3 days of silence. 3 days trying to explain to the children that their father was on an extended work trip. August, at 7 years old, was too smart to believe that story. "Why aren't Dad's clothes in the closet?" he asked with his eyes identical to his father's. I didn't have the heart to lie to my own son. "Your father did wrong things, August," I explained, my voice breaking. "He won't be living with us for a while." On the morning of the 4th day, I heard violent knocks on the door. It was Herbert demanding to enter. "Open this door, Amanda," he shouted. "This house is mine. You don't have the right." The children hid in the bedroom, frightened. They had never seen their father like this, transformed into a furious stranger. I approached the door without opening it. "Go away, Herbert. It's over." "It's not over until I say it's over," he yelled, pounding on the door with such force I thought the hinges would give way. "Open this door, or I'll knock it down." I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the largest knife we had. I didn't intend to use it, but I needed to show I wasn't defenseless. When I returned to the living room, I heard male voices outside. "Mr. Johnson, this can't continue. You're frightening the children." It was Mr. Anthony, the bakery owner, along with Joaquin from the grocery store. Herbert's shouts had attracted the neighbors. The small town of Riverdale wasn't used to scandals. "That hussy threw me out of my own house," Herbert complained, his slurred voice indicating he had been drinking. "Don't talk like that, man," Mr. Anthony reprimanded. "Mrs. Johnson is a respectable woman." "Respectable?" Herbert gave a bitter laugh. "You don't know what she did." I rested my forehead against the door, my hand tightly gripping the knife. What would he say? That I had followed him, that I had confronted him at the Moonlight Star? And if he told, who would be judged in town? He, the man with 13 lovers, or the wife who couldn't hold on to her husband? "Come on, Mr. Johnson," said Joaquin. "Let's have a coffee at Chico's bar. You need to cool off." To my relief, there were footsteps moving away. Herbert was led away, muttering threats. I peeked through the window and saw Mr. Anthony cast a sympathetic look at the house before turning the corner. That same afternoon, he returned, not to shout or threaten, but to bring a message. "Mrs. Johnson," he spoke in a soft voice through the door, still locked. "Mr. Johnson sent word that he'll cut off the money, that you and the children will starve if he doesn't come back." It was the blow I feared. Without Herbert's salary, how would I feed 3 mouths? How would I pay the rent? Even so, I straightened my back. Tell him I'd rather beg on the street than accept another cent of his lies. Mr. Anthony sighed. I heard the noise of a package being placed on the porch floor. "I brought some bread for the children." "It's not charity, Mrs. Johnson, it's humanity." After he left, I opened the door just enough to take the package. Inside were loaves of bread, biscuits, a jar of guava jelly. I cried again, but this time out of gratitude. In the following weeks, I discovered how difficult it was to be a separated woman in 1968, in a small town in the interior. The other mothers wouldn't let their daughters play with Mary Claire, as if the abandonment by the husband was a contagious disease. At church, Father Anselm preached about the dangers of family disintegration, looking fixedly at the bench where I sat with my 3 children. Gossip ran rampant. Some said I had expelled Herbert because of unfounded jealousy. Others, that he had found a younger and richer lover in the city. Few knew the complete truth, and I didn't have the energy to correct them. The money ran out quickly, the rent came due, and the landlord, a friend of Herbert's, threatened to evict us. That's when Josephine, Theodora's mother, appeared at my door one afternoon. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, eyes downcast as always, "my daughter sent this for you," and extended an envelope. Inside was money, not much, but enough for that month's rent. Along with it, a note written in a shaky hand. "For the children. It's not charity, it's justice. Theodora." My first impulse was to refuse. I didn't want money that came from that place, that might have been given by Herbert himself. But I looked at August, Mary Claire, and John Peter, their clothes already too small, their hopeful eyes, and swallowed my pride. "Thank your daughter," I said to Josephine. "Tell her that one day I'll repay her." Josephine nodded, and before leaving, said something that changed my life. "My daughter mentioned that you sew your own clothes well. At the Star, at that place, they need someone to repair the girls' dresses. You don't have to go there. I can bring and take them back." I was paralyzed. Work for the place that destroyed my marriage. Sew for the women Herbert frequented. "Think of the children, Mrs. Johnson," Josephine added, as if reading my thoughts. "It's honest work. Your hands, your needle, your talent, just that." That night was one of deep reflection. I had learned to sew from my mother, who made uniforms for all my brothers. I always had talent, but never thought of turning it into a livelihood. In my upbringing, married women didn't work outside the home. It was almost a sin. But I wasn't married anymore, I reminded myself. I was alone with 3 children to feed in a world that seemed determined to punish me for a crime I didn't commit. What choice did I have? "Bring the dresses," I said to Josephine the next day. "I'll do the best job I can." And so began my career as a seamstress. At first, just mending and adjustments for the girls from the Moonlight Star. Josephine served as a messenger, bringing the pieces in a basket covered with a cloth, as if transporting bread. I worked at night, after the children were asleep, under the dim light of a lamp. People in town didn't know the origin of those clothes, but they noticed the changes in my house, the rent being paid on time, food on the table, new shoes for the children. Soon, malicious tongues began to wag again. "How does she support herself without a husband?" they whispered at the market. "She must have a rich lover in the city," they speculated after Mass. "Perhaps the husband left hidden money," they guessed at the store. I ignored them all. The important thing was to keep my children fed, clothed, in school. And gradually my work improved, my hands becoming more skilled, my stitches more precise. In October of that same year, I received my first order that didn't come from the Moonlight Star. Mrs. Carmela, the pharmacist's wife, had admired Mary Claire's Sunday dress, made by me with scraps and lots of imagination. "Could you make something similar for my Teresa?" she asked timidly after Mass. I accepted, of course. Teresa's dress was a success, and soon other mothers were knocking at my door. "I heard you make beautiful, affordable dresses," they would say, with that mixture of curiosity and suspicion. By December, I had so many orders that I needed to buy more threads and fabrics. Without enough money, I went to the state bank to ask for a loan. The manager, Mr. Cloves, a man with a thick mustache and severe look, laughed at my request. "You want a loan? Without a husband as guarantor? Without property as collateral? Impossible." I left the bank with my head down, but didn't give up. I went to Josephine's house with a bold proposal. She would be my partner. Her house, larger than mine, would serve as collateral for the loan. In exchange, I would teach her to sew, and we would share the profits. "But Mrs. Johnson," she protested, "I'm just an old candy seller. Who would want me to sew their dresses?" "They won't be ordinary dresses," I explained, feeling an excitement I hadn't experienced in a long time. "There'll be home decorations, tablecloths, napkins, curtains, things that every home needs and that no one sells in Riverdale." Josephine thought for a long time, her gnarled fingers caressing the worn wooden table. Finally, she nodded. "If you think I can, then I accept." With Josephine's house as collateral, Mr. Cloves reluctantly approved a small loan. We bought fabrics, threads, needles, and a second-hand sewing machine. We set everything up in Josephine's living room and named our small business Points and Bows. The first months were difficult. People still looked at me with suspicion, still whispered behind my back. Some refused to enter Josephine's house, known as the mother of a lost girl. But the quality of our work spoke louder than prejudices. Our tablecloths were exquisite, with delicate embroidery of flowers and fruits. The bedding sets came with embroidered initials, a luxury that previously only rich families could order from the city. The curtains transformed any simple window into something elegant. In June 1969, 6 months after the start of Points and Bows, we had more orders than we could handle. We hired Margaret, a widow with skilled hands who needed to support 4 children. Then came Dolly, whose husband had run off with the waitress from the bar. Next came Inez, abandoned with a newborn baby. We were 5 women, all marked in some way by life, all fighting to survive in a world that wanted us submissive and silent. Together, we created something greater than ourselves. Herbert reappeared several times throughout that year. At first with threats, then with pleas, finally with presents for the children. I refused everything. "We don't need you anymore," I told him one Sunday afternoon when he appeared with new bicycles for August and Mary Claire. "We're fine on our own." He looked at the house, noticing the improvements. New curtains, a radio in the living room, toys in the yard. "Who's supporting you?" he asked, the jealousy evident in his voice. "I am," I replied simply. "I support my children." "With what?" he insisted. "What do you do?" "Honest work, Herbert. Something you should try someday." He left furious, threatening to return with the police, with lawyers, with the county judge. He never fulfilled his threats. Perhaps he knew he had no moral ground to judge anyone. In December 1969, with money from the special Christmas sale, I was able to buy the house where we had been renting. The former owner, seeing the success of Points and Bows, was eager to get rid of a house associated with a separated woman. He offered it at a below-market price, thinking I wouldn't be able to pay. His surprise was evident when I placed the money on the table in clean, well-counted bills. "The deed, please," I asked, feeling a pride I had never experienced before. That night, sitting on the porch of my house, watching my children play in our yard, I realized how much I had changed in just 1 year. The woman who had cried desperately in the kitchen, fearing the future without a husband, had disappeared. In her place was a businesswoman, a providing mother, a woman who didn't need a man to define herself. August, now 8 years old, climbed onto my lap, something he did less frequently, feeling too grown up for such displays of affection. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm proud of you." I hugged my son, the tears silently flowing. They were the sweetest words I had ever heard, sweeter than any "I love you" from Herbert, more meaningful than any compliment from a satisfied customer. "Thank you, my son," I replied, kissing his forehead. "I'm proud of us too." And so we ended 1969, a year that began with fear and ended with hope. A year in which I learned that the worst betrayal can lead to the best discovery, the discovery of one's own strength. I didn't know then, but that was just the beginning of a journey that would take me far beyond the limits of Riverdale, far beyond what anyone, including myself, ever imagined for a separated woman in the 60s. The 70s arrived with winds of change. America was experiencing its economic miracle, cities were growing, and even our peaceful Riverdale felt the effects of modernization. A new state highway passed just 3 miles from downtown, bringing travelers and new opportunities. For Points and Bows, 1970 was a decisive year. Our small workshop in Josephine's house could no longer accommodate the 6 seamstresses who now worked with us. We needed to expand, but renting a commercial space was out of the question. Property owners still hesitated to negotiate with a separated woman, even one with a prosperous business. It was August, with his 9 years and the wisdom that children sometimes demonstrate, who suggested the solution. "Why don't we use our house, Mom? The yard is big. We can build there." That child had the gift of seeing the obvious that adults ignored. Our yard, a legacy from times when the town's houses had space for gardens and chicken coops, was really ample. With some planning and saving, we could build a suitable shed for our machines and employees. Getting the permit was another battle. Mayor Dr. Gerald hesitated when I presented the request. "A sewing shop run by women?" he questioned, the incredulity evident on his flushed face. "What if it goes wrong? What if the machines cause a fire? What if it goes right?" I interrupted with a boldness I didn't possess just a few months ago. "What if we create jobs? What if we pay taxes? What if Riverdale becomes known for its beautiful embroidery and sewing?" He scratched his head, uncomfortable with my assertiveness. Women didn't talk like that in 1970, especially not to authorities, but I was no longer the submissive Amanda of before. "I'll think about your case," he grumbled, storing my papers in the drawer. 3 weeks passed without an answer. Our orders were accumulating, customers complaining about delays. Something needed to be done. On a Thursday, market day in the central square, I set up an improvised stand next to Josephine. She with her sweets, me with our most beautiful pieces, embroidered tablecloths, placemats, napkins with monograms, baby layettes. The display immediately caught the attention of the women in town. "What exquisite work, Mrs. Johnson!" exclaimed the judge's wife, admiring a set of sheets with delicately worked hems. "Could you make something like this for my trousseau?" asked the pharmacist's daughter, a recent fiancée. In 2 hours, we sold everything we had brought. More importantly, we received orders that would keep our needles busy for 3 months. Among the visitors was Mrs. Eleanor, the mayor's wife. "My daughter is getting married in December," she commented, meticulously examining a napkin. "I need a complete trousseau and was going to order from Chicago, but perhaps you can accommodate." "It would be an honor," I replied, noting the details in my little notebook. "But we would need more space, more seamstresses. We're waiting for a permit to expand our atelier." I left the phrase hanging in the air, and the hook was fished exactly as I expected. "What permit?" she asked, adjusting her glasses on her upturned nose. "To build in my yard. Your husband is analyzing the request." 3 days later, the permit arrived at home, along with an invitation for tea at the mayor's official residence. The power of a wife determined to have the best trousseau for her daughter should never be underestimated. The construction began in June. With the money saved in recent months and a small loan, now granted without hesitation by the state bank, we built a spacious, airy shed. Light ceramic floor, large windows to take advantage of natural light, spacious benches for cutting and sewing. In the center, we installed our most precious acquisition, an industrial embroidery machine imported from Germany. That machine changed everything. What previously took days to be embroidered by hand, we could now do in hours. Our productivity tripled, allowing more competitive prices and shorter deadlines. Soon, we were not only serving Riverdale, but also neighboring towns. Cecilia's trousseau, the mayor's daughter, was our masterpiece until then. Egyptian linen sheets with embroidery of roses and arabesques, bath towels with intertwined monograms, bedding sets with Renaissance hems. When the pieces were displayed at the wedding reception in December, they became the talk of the party, almost eclipsing the bride, to Mrs. Eleanor's dismay. The publicity generated by the wedding was invaluable. January 1971 brought so many orders that we needed to hire 5 more seamstresses, Points and Bows was no longer a small atelier of helpless women. It was a serious, respected, profitable business. Herbert reappeared at this time, attracted like a fly to the smell of success. He was thinner, less elegant, his hair already thinning. The brightness of yesteryear had disappeared from his eyes, replaced by an opacity that spoke of defeats and disillusions. "Amanda," he greeted, standing at the door of the atelier like an insecure salesman. "You look different." I was indeed. At 29, I was no longer the shy girl he met. My hair, previously always tied in severe buns, now fell loose over my shoulders. I wore discreet makeup, more modern clothes. But the biggest change wasn't external. It was the confidence that emanated from every gesture, every word. "What do you want, Herbert?" I asked without inviting him in. "I came to see the boys," he said, but his eyes scanned the atelier, assessing, calculating, "and to congratulate you on your success. I heard your business is doing well." "Our children are at school," I replied dryly, "and yes, the business is doing well. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot of work to do." He hesitated, his restless hands in the pockets of his worn suit. "Amanda, I've been thinking. Maybe I could help. I have experience with accounting. I could organize the finances, negotiate with suppliers." I almost laughed in his face. Herbert, the man who spent his salary on 13 lovers offering to take care of my money, was too comical. "I appreciate the offer," I replied with icy politeness. "But we already have an accountant. As for suppliers, I negotiate personally. I've discovered that men offer better prices when they realize they can't fool me." The jab hit him like a slap. He blushed, opened his mouth to retort, but reconsidered when he saw two of my seamstresses observing the scene with barely disguised interest. "Tell the boys I stopped by," he muttered, turning to leave. "And Mary Claire, too, of course." It was typical of Herbert to forget his daughter. Mary Claire, at 8 years old, had already noticed that her father paid more attention to the boys, especially August, his firstborn. She noticed how the boys' presents were always more expensive, more elaborate, how the hugs for her were shorter, less enthusiastic. "I'll tell all my children that their father stopped by," I replied, emphasizing all. "But I don't promise they'll want to see you." He left with his head down, a shadow of the arrogant man I knew. I later learned that he had lost his job at the factory, drunkenness and constant absences. He now worked as a night watchman at a construction materials warehouse, earning 1/3 of what he received before. The Moonlight Star, according to the truckers who brought merchandise to our town, had closed. Rumors ran that the authorities had discovered illegal gambling happening in the back of the establishment. The girls dispersed, some returning to their native towns, others seeking similar work in larger places. Theodora, Josephine's daughter, had surprisingly married a traveling salesman and moved to Cleveland. "She sends word that she's doing well," Josephine told me one afternoon, her eyes shining with maternal pride. "She says it was your example that inspired her." Seeing a woman rising on her own showed that there were other paths. That moved me deeply. The idea that my personal struggle could inspire another woman to seek a better life was comforting. Perhaps there was a greater purpose in everything I went through. In 1972, Points and Bows took another leap. A national women's magazine, Modern Life, published an article about businesses run by women. Somehow, I suspect through Mrs. Eleanor, always ready to boast about her daughter's trousseau, our atelier was included. "From Abandonment to Success, How Amanda Johnson Transformed Betrayal into Triumph," announced the title. The report told my story in a romanticized way, omitting the sordid details, but capturing the essence of the journey. At the end, there were photos of our most elaborate pieces with information for orders. In the following weeks, the phone didn't stop ringing. We received orders from New York, Los Angeles, Dallas. Department stores wanted to negotiate exclusive lines. A famous boutique from the capital proposed a collection with our signature. It was more than we could handle with our current structure. We needed to grow, and fast. But how? The answer came from an unexpected source: Father Anselm, the same one who years before had embarrassed me during the sermon. After Sunday Mass, he called me to the sacristy. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, visibly uncomfortable. "I've been observing your work in recent years. You have transformed the lives of many women in this town." I nodded, not knowing where that conversation would lead. The parish owns a lot at the entrance of town. It was land donated to build a nursing home, but the resources never came. It has been empty for decades. He paused, took a deep breath. "I'd like to propose a partnership. The church provides the land, you build your factory, and in exchange, you employ girls from the orphanage when they turn 16. I was speechless. The lot he mentioned was perfect, spacious, flat, at the entrance to town, visible to those passing on the highway. Building there would mean significantly expanding our capacity and visibility. "Why would you do this, Father?" I asked, genuinely curious. "You never approved of my lifestyle." He blushed, his nervous fingers adjusting his clerical collar. "I judged without knowing, Mrs. Johnson. Christ teaches us to look at the fruits, and the fruits of your work are good. You've created honest jobs for women the world rejected, taught skills, restored dignity. That is Christian work, even if it took me a while to see it." I left the church that Sunday with my head spinning. The proposal was tempting but frightening. Building a factory would require much larger investments than a simple shed in the yard. It would mean substantial loans, long-term commitments, expanded responsibilities. I talked with my children that night. August, now at 11, had inherited his father's talent for numbers. He took a notebook and began to make simple calculations of how much we could produce in the new space, how much it would cost, how much we would profit. Mary Claire, at 9 years old, already showed interest in design. Her drawings of embroidery and patterns were surprisingly sophisticated for her age. "Can we have a room just to create the designs, Mom?" she suggested, her eyes shining with excitement. John Peter, at 7 years old, was more concerned about whether the new factory would have space for him to play after school. "Can I have an office like August?" he asked, making everyone laugh. Seeing their enthusiasm, I realized the decision was already made. My children had grown up with the business. It was part of their identities as much as it was of mine. Expanding wasn't just a business decision. It was a legacy I was building for them. In January 1973, we signed the contract with the parish. In July, we began construction. And in March 1974, we inaugurated the Points and Bows embroidery and clothing factory with 50 employees, modern machinery, and an elegant showroom at the entrance. The abandoned girl from Riverdale now commanded the largest company in the region. The betrayed wife was now a respected businesswoman whose name opened doors in banks and suppliers. The desperate mother, who feared not being able to feed her children, now offered jobs and security to dozens of families. The factory inauguration was an event in town. The mayor attended with his entire family, as did the bank manager, the sheriff, the most prosperous merchants. Even the regional press sent a reporter. Amid the celebration, I noticed a solitary figure, observing from a distance, not approaching. Herbert, prematurely aged, shoulders bent under the weight of wrong choices. For an instant, our gazes met. There was no anger in my eyes, no resentment, just the serene realization that he had become irrelevant in my story. That night, after all the guests had departed and my children were asleep, I sat on the porch of our house, the same one from which I was almost evicted years before, and contemplated the path traveled. The pain of betrayal had been excruciating, the fear of abandonment paralyzing. There were nights when I cried until I had no more tears, days when I doubted I would survive. But that pain, that fear, that uncertainty, all had been transformed into strength, determination, purpose. Herbert's abandonment, which seemed like a death sentence to the young Amanda of 1968, had been, in reality, the birth of a new woman. A woman who discovered capabilities she didn't know she possessed. A woman who learned to forge her own path, to trust her judgment, to raise her voice when necessary. As the stars shone over Riverdale, I silently thanked the journey with all its pains and joys, because I finally understood a fundamental truth. Sometimes, the end of one dream is just the beginning of a larger, more authentic dream, more our own. And that night in March 1974 wasn't an end. It was just the beginning of a new chapter with challenges and achievements that I couldn't even imagine. The girl who dreamed of a Prince Charming had transformed into a queen who built her own kingdom, brick by brick, stitch by stitch. The following years brought continuous growth for Points and Bows. From a small factory in Riverdale, we expanded to 3 units in neighboring cities. Our pieces were sold in the best stores in New York, Chicago, and even exported to neighboring countries. The brand that was born from the necessity of a desperate mother became synonymous with quality and sophistication. But professional success, as great as it was, never overshadowed what I consider my greatest achievement. My children, August, Mary Claire, and John Peter, grew up amid fabrics, threads, and the constant noise of sewing machines, absorbing lessons that no school could teach. They saw up close the value of honest work, perseverance, the dignity that comes from building something with one's own hands. In 1980, August turned 19 and left for Chicago to study business administration. Seeing my firstborn enter university, something his grandparents never dreamed would be possible, brought an indescribable satisfaction. He had inherited my determination and his father's mathematical talent, a combination that transformed him into a brilliant manager. Mary Claire followed in his footsteps 2 years later, choosing fashion and design at the same university. At 19, she already had a notebook full of innovative designs for our bed and table line. Her artistic sensitivity transformed simple fabrics into true works of art, bringing a modernity that rejuvenated our brand. John Peter, always the most dreamy of the 3, surprised everyone by declaring he wanted to be a doctor. "I want to care for people as Mom cared for us," he explained, with the profound simplicity that always characterized him. In 1983, he also left for the city, determined to transform his dream into reality. Seeing my children taking flights higher than I ever imagined possible for myself was my true reward. Each of their achievements erased a bit more of the pain of the past, confirming that all the sleepless nights, all the sacrifices, all the struggle had been worth it. With the children studying in the city, I sold our house in Riverdale and bought an apartment in Chicago. At 40, I too was ready for new horizons. The factory remained under the care of Mrs. Josephine, now my formal partner, and Margaret, our first employee, promoted to general manager. Life in the metropolis opened a world of possibilities. I enrolled in business administration and marketing courses, determined to formalize the knowledge I had acquired in practice. At 41, I sat in classrooms alongside 20-year-olds without the slightest embarrassment. On the contrary, my practical experience enriched the theoretical discussions, making the professors my biggest supporters. In 1984, I opened the first exclusive Points and Bows store on Michigan Avenue, then the center of Chicago fashion. The space, decorated with the rustic elegance that characterized our pieces, quickly became a meeting point for demanding women. We didn't just sell bed and table linens, we sold the idea of a welcoming home, carefully decorated where every detail mattered. It was in this store, on a rainy June afternoon, that I met Herbert again after almost 10 years without seeing him. I was at the cash register helping an elderly customer with her purchase when the doorbell rang. I automatically looked up, and there he was, or rather, a faded version of the man I knew. At 50, Herbert looked like he was 70. His hair, once black and thick, was completely white and thin. His body, once imposing, was bent like an overloaded branch. But his eyes, those eyes that once hypnotized me, remained the same, though now clouded by a permanent sadness. "Amanda," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I finally found you." I asked a salesgirl to take over the cash register and led Herbert to a small room at the back of the store, used for meetings and for showing special products to selected customers. I offered him a chair and a coffee, which he accepted with visibly trembling hands. "How did you find me?" I asked, sitting across from him. "August," he replied, his eyes fixed on the coffee cup. "I ran into him by chance on the street a few weeks ago. He told me about the store." I made a mental note to talk to my son. Not in anger. August had the right to maintain contact with his father if he wished, but to understand his reasons. "What do you want, Herbert?" I asked, getting straight to the point. The young Amanda would have circled around the issue, fearing to offend. The 42-year-old woman had no time for games. He raised his eyes from the cup, and what I saw in them surprised me. There wasn't the calculating charm of yesteryear, nor the anger of the last encounters. There was only fatigue, a deep fatigue that comes from the soul. "Forgiveness," he said simply. "I've come to ask for your forgiveness, Amanda." I remained silent, observing this broken man before me. Part of me wanted to say it was too late, that forgiveness should have been asked for 15 years ago when it still mattered. Another part, perhaps the wiser one, recognized the courage necessary for that gesture, even if belated. "Why now?" I finally asked. Herbert sighed, placing the cup on the table with excessive care. "I'm sick, Amanda. Liver cancer, advanced stage. The doctors say I have a few months." The news hit me like a punch to the stomach. Despite everything he had done, despite the pain he caused me, Herbert was the father of my children. His departure would leave an impossible void to fill. "I'm sorry," I murmured. I was sincere. "Me too," he replied, a sad smile playing on his dry lips. "I'm sorry for everything, Amanda. For the years of lies, for the wasted money, for the suffering I caused. You are the best thing that ever happened in my life. And I was too stupid to realize it. Why, Herbert?" The question that had tormented me for so many years finally escaped. "Why 13 women? Why the lies? What didn't I give you?" He closed his eyes for a moment, as if seeking strength for the answer. When he reopened them, there was a clarity in them that I hadn't seen since our first days together. "It wasn't about you, Amanda. It never was. It was about me, about my emptiness, my insecurities. I grew up watching my father blatantly betray my mother, boasting about his conquests as if they were trophies. In my distorted mind, that was being a man, not having one woman, but many, not being faithful, but desired. It was sick, it was toxic, but it was the only model I knew." His words unearthed long-buried memories. Herbert rarely spoke of his family, but I vaguely remembered his father, a tall, imposing man who attended our wedding drunk, making inappropriate comments about the guests. "That doesn't justify it," I replied, keeping my voice firm. "No," he agreed promptly. "It doesn't justify it. Nothing justifies the harm I caused. I'm just trying to explain, not excuse." We remained silent for a few minutes, the only sound being the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant murmur of the store. Finally, I gathered courage for the most difficult question. "And the others? The 13? A tired sigh escaped his lips. "They scattered like leaves in the wind when the money ran out. Some found other protectors, others returned to their families. Theodora was the only one who really moved forward. Built a decent life, just like you." "Theodora got married," I commented. "She has 3 children now, lives in Cleveland. You kept in touch?" "With Josephine?" he asked, surprised. "We're partners, remember?" He nodded slowly. "You two, you transformed a tragedy into triumph." I just sank. There was nothing to respond to that. It was the pure truth. "What happened after you left Riverdale?" I asked, realizing that despite everything, there was a genuine curiosity about the fate of the man I once loved. "I tried to start over in several cities," he replied, running his hand through his thin hair. "I worked as a salesman, as an office assistant, as a hotel receptionist. Nothing lasted. Drinking always ended up knocking me down." Herbert paused as if deciding how much to reveal. "I hit rock bottom in 1978. I was living on the streets of Milwaukee, drinking anything I could buy or steal. That's when a recovery group found me. They took me to a clinic, helped me get sober." "Are you sober now?" I asked. 5 years and 6 months, he replied with discreet pride. Too late to save my liver, but in time to die with some dignity. The conversation flowed for another hour. Herbert told me about his years of drifting, about his slow and painful recovery, about the work he now did as a volunteer at the same clinic that welcomed him. He talked about the remorse he carried, not just for me, but for the children he barely knew. August visits me sometimes, he revealed. Always formal, always polite, but distant. Mary Claire replied to a letter I sent, but asked me not to seek her out. John Peter, his voice failed. John Peter told me he already has a parent. That you were mother and father at the same time and did a better job than any man could have done. Unexpected tears blurred my vision. My youngest, always so sensitive, so observant. He saw what so many didn't realize, that being a complete family didn't depend on having all the traditional pieces, but on having enough love to fill all the spaces. They're good boys, I said, correcting myself immediately. Good adults now, thanks to you, not me. Thanks to you, not me. Another silence settled, more comfortable this time. The storm that our relationship once was had calmed, leaving only the clarity that comes after the rain. So, Amanda, he finally said, his restless hands on his lap. Can you forgive me? Not for me. I know I don't deserve it, but for you, so you can move on in peace. I looked at that man, so different from the arrogant young man who conquered me, so distant from the lying husband who abandoned me. I saw in him all the mistakes, all the weaknesses, all the wrong choices, but I also saw, for the first time, something genuine. True repentance, born not of fear or convenience, but of a late understanding of the damage caused. Yes, I replied, surprising us both with the ease of the word. I forgive you, Herbert. And it was true. There was no more anger in my heart, no resentment in my soul. That man no longer had power over my happiness, my peace of mind. Forgiveness wasn't a gift for him. It was a final liberation for me. Herbert passed away 3 months later, in September 1984. August called me with the news, his voice controlled, but trembling. He left in peace, Mom. He was holding a picture of us, you, me, Mary Claire, and John Peter, when he closed his eyes for the last time. The funeral was simple, with few attendees. My 3 children came, each processing the loss in a different way. I also went, not out of obligation, but out of respect for the imperfect man who, despite everything, had given me 3 priceless gifts. As the coffin was lowered into the earth, I thought of the irony of life. The man who once wanted so many women died practically alone. The woman he abandoned was surrounded by a loving family, a thriving business, a full life. There was no triumph in this realization, just a melancholy understanding of how our choices shape our destinies, how each lie, each betrayal, each act of selfishness eventually takes its toll, and how each act of courage, each decision based on love, each step taken with dignity builds, brick by brick, a life worth living. Today, at 83, I look back and see not just the pain of that betrayed young woman, but all the beauty that blossomed from the ashes of a destroyed marriage. I see my children now with their own children, building lives based on the values I taught them. I see Points and Bows, now a national chain run by August and Mary Claire, offering dignified employment to hundreds of women. I see John Peter, a respected doctor, caring for patients with the same compassion that I once dedicated to my small family. And when my granddaughters ask me about the grandfather they never knew, I don't tell a story of villains and victims. I tell a story of imperfect people, of errors and consequences, of losses and new beginnings. I tell about how sometimes we need to lose everything we think we want to discover what we really need. Every month, when I receive my retirement check, I smile remembering those old monthly illnesses of Herbert's. That money he spent at the Moonlight Star could have guaranteed a comfortable old age for both of us. His absence forced me to build my own security, brick by brick, stitch by stitch. And perhaps that's the greatest lesson I can leave for you, my dears. No betrayal, no abandonment, no pain defines who we are. What defines us are the choices we make in the face of adversity, the dreams we dare to dream, even when the world says they're impossible. The love we continue to give, even when our hearts are broken. Because in the end, it's not the blows of life that determine our destiny. It's our response to them. And my response to that painful discovery of 1968 was to transform each tear into determination, each fear into courage, each rejection into strength to move forward. Every month, when Herbert got sick to meet his 13 lovers, he had no idea he was planting the seed of his own ruin and my unexpected liberation. Life has these ironies, and thank God for them. Before I say goodbye, my dears, I'd like to ask you to leave a thumbs up on this video. If my story touched your heart, subscribe to the Grandma's Diary to follow more stories like this, and leave in the comments where you're watching from. Share with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to start over, no matter how difficult it may seem. Your interaction helps me continue sharing stories of overcoming that can inspire other people. Thank you very much for listening to me today.